I wanted to help beginning teachers understand the excitement that comes with teaching, but also the complexity that is inherent in the profession. To really, really listen to the students whom they're teaching so that they can begin to craft lessons that are more culturally responsive, more relevant to the students who are in their midst. I think student teachers and beginning teachers tend to rely on the ways in which they were taught, and that's fine. But there are times when you need to really break out of the box and begin to think of new ways of doing things. Get excited about possibilities. I hope the book is about standing up for teaching, not only learning how to teach, but understanding how important it is to teach from the heart, teach who you are. So you take your own personal identities as teachers, you weave stories of yourself into your teaching, and you begin to meld your students' stories, your students' identities with your own, so that you begin to create classrooms of possibilities where really interesting things happen. So it's a book that is simple in some ways. I mean, it's very sort of basic about how to begin, but it's also a book that introduces you to the complex nature of all this, and I hope it helps a bit. Often I hear my students say, but I don't know even how to begin to plan. So there's a chapter on how to plan a lesson, how to map backwards from a culminating task in unit planning, how to think about the ways in which one can scaffold lessons so that you actually begin somewhere and end up in another place that is even better. So there's lesson and unit planning in the book, lots of information about that. There's also information about how to manage classrooms. Now, I didn't really want to have a separate chapter on classroom management because I do think teaching and classroom management go hand in hand, but there are essential ideas about classroom management that need to be set out, I think, for beginning teachers. The ways in which one manages large groups of students is something that you learn over time. And there are techniques that I know and other teachers know that are just helpful. So there's 30 classroom management techniques that might help a beginning teacher think about how to manage a classroom a little bit better. I mean, one of them is something that I call chunking. Often beginning teachers, let's say they are giving a handout, so they hand out the material and then talk about it. But kids are so involved in getting the pages or getting the script or getting the materials that they aren't listening to the teacher. So one of the ideas is to talk about the material that you're going to hand out, describe what the material is about, ask the students to notice certain things about what is going to be presented, and then quietly hand out the material. And then everybody sort of has a chance to kind of shuffle pages and get organized, and then the teacher can proceed from there. There's just these little things that you learn about voice modulation, about not waiting for everybody to be ready. That just takes up so much time. Just begin. And if you're interesting enough, and if the work is compelling enough, students will be drawn into it. There's just these little things that happen. How do you begin on your first day? What do you wear? How do you get there? What do you do when you walk into the classroom? What do you need to be prepared for? How do you keep going? How do you not get discouraged? How do you move forward and connect with others? So another part of the book is about mentorship, finding yourself someone who is going to help you, not tell you that everything's great when it isn't. I think one of the essential components of this book is helping teachers understand that they need to find out about who's in the room. Who are their students? Where are they from? What do they care about? What contributing factors can they bring into the classroom? Finding out about their identities, finding out about their stories, their family stories, how they connect to the community around the school. I mean, one of the things that I say in the book is that, good teachers find out about their students. They have a sense of their students so that students can have a sense of themselves in relationship to others. And then it's also important that teachers have a sense of who they are. What do they bring to the classroom? What privileges do they have? How do they manage power effectively and fairly? And then how do you engage with the broader school community? How do you make sure that you get to know the geography around the school, the cultures, the cultural components of that school, and bring those stories and those facets into the classroom? There's relationships, there's a reciprocity that has to happen. You need to find ways of getting to know your kids so that you actually can find curriculum connections for them. A lot of this book is connected to finding your own pedagogical signature. As a teacher with a lot of experience, I have a desire to have sort of open-ended, reciprocal, exciting, imaginative relationships with my kids, so that I'm interested in not going in with just a plan, but a plan that is flexible enough as I get to know who's in the room and honor the responses that those kids are giving me. So that I might think I go in, that this lesson is going to go this way, but if I really am interested in the response from my students, the lesson will change almost immediately, and I will have to figure out how to go on and from there. I also think another part of teaching is being fascinated by what your students are all about. How are they learning? How are they learning in ways that you didn't expect? What are the difficulties that they are having? How can I not judge them, but be fascinated by where they're at, and then how can I help them move beyond that? There is kind of an ethic of doing really good work, and that one has to sort of work towards that nothing is mediocre, and your teaching isn't mediocre either. I do say in the book that I don't believe every lesson has to be scintillating, like just amazing all the time. But I do believe that you go into the classroom believing that there's going to be some sort of transformation every day, that you're going to actually touch the hearts and minds of your students and make them believe in themselves as learners and challenge them to learn things that they didn't even know they had to know. The other part of all this, teaching, which is so complicated, is to strive always to be fair in your teaching, to understand that learning is complicated. You need to re-teach kids their loveliness, to say to them, you might not be understanding this now, but with a lot of hard work on my part and on your part, we're going to ultimately understand this and move on. It's a book that's simple, but not, people who read it will ultimately want to stand up and teach, and teach from their heart and teach in the best way they know how. You can't possibly know how to teach at the beginning. You know a little bit, but the only way you really learn how to teach is by teaching and by making mistakes. And I talk write a lot about the mistakes that I made in teaching, that things that I didn't understand, moving on and forgiving yourself for those mistakes and saying, the next day I'm going to go at it differently. But I think keeping going is part of the whole process. My late husband had this great saying, teachers show up, and we do. We show up even though it's difficult, and we try our best every day. And so I hope the book kind of gives teachers ideas about how to show up and do good work. There is a chapter on teaching strategies, sort of 20 teaching strategies that, many teachers know a lot about them, but beginning teachers might know a few of them. So I hope that that's helpful as well. I was watching one of my student teachers teach, a number of years ago and went with her to the classroom, and she said, that she was nervous, or she was going to teach something that she knew quite a bit about. So I agreed with that and said, sure, let's see what you do and how you do it and stuff. And it was really interesting. She was in a classroom. The kids were incredibly polite and, very amenable to what it is she was doing and saying, but she sat for the entire lesson. And, the lesson went well. I mean, they answered her questions. They filled out the exit slip. They were compliant, and they did what she wanted them to do. But I thought to myself, there's so much more that could happen here. So I began to think, I need to write about standing up metaphorically to teach in ways that are exciting and new and different and interactive. Because I don't want to diminish that student teacher because she was doing what she thought she should be doing. But I do think teaching is much more dynamic than that. It's messy, it's difficult. Often when you get into those realms, the kids are with you. They're wanting to be with you. And the other thing that I used to do when I taught young adolescents is I would often stop and say, where do we go from here? And I write about a teacher, one of the teachers that I worked with on a big research project in Windsor, Ontario. And she talked about, every day she worked with her grade 5s, and she sits down with them and she says, she's planned out her day or her lessons. And she says to them, this is what I'm thinking. You tell me what you're thinking. And they kind of negotiate the lesson. And I think, wow, giving students an opportunity to co-construct with you, learning environments where things happen and everybody's involved and is fantastic. So that reciprocal relationship, the messiness of it, the interactive nature of it, and not knowing where you're going in the lesson sometimes can add a certain frisson that you think, whoa, and everybody knows it, If kids think that if you ask them a question to which you know the answer, there's no excitement there. It's finding the questions that nobody knows the answer to. There are multiple perspectives on this question. And you're really getting somewhere when kids say, I'm not sure about this, but this is what I'm thinking. And, I'm not sure, but I'm tentatively trying to think through these things. One of the things that is important is that, beginning teachers work with people who they establish a relationship with, who, somebody who knows a lot about teaching and who can help them. And connect what it is they're trying to do to the context of the school in which they're in and the students that they're teaching. And that there is sort of an honoring of the curriculum that needs to be taught, a respect for that curriculum, but also a respect for the diversity that is in the room, that students are going to react to curriculum contexts from their own particular location, and that we have to be open to that diverse response and work with mentors to talk about how do you include everybody in the conversation and make sure that you honor everybody's voice, even those that we find difficult to listen to sometimes. I think that if you establish a respectful classroom environment, people are going to buy in and begin to talk about what it is they're thinking about. So I think that's important. And one of the ways that you do that is and which I've done for years and this is this particular activity where I work from what students tell me about themselves in terms of their culture, their language, the choices that they've made in life, the family sayings and sayings from mentors that drive them, that keep them going, places that they visited or come from or want to go to. So I sort of begin by asking students to work alone and I ask, where are you from? I am from this particular geography. I'm from this particular favorite food. I'm from something that was said to me that changed my life, etc. So you ask students to respond to your prompts, and then they work with a partner sharing how their responses are the same and different, and then they create sort of a poem, a we are from poem, where they begin to meld their words and identities together. Not only do they create it, they perform it. So there's performative activities. How do you read it together? How do you change the reading? How do you change the ways in which the lines are read? What do you edit? What do you cut? What do you add, etc.? And then finding ways of having those students find their favorite line, and then creating a class poem so that we have sort of a central core of where those kids are from, literally, and everybody has a chance to put in their kind of 2 cents worth. This is who I am. This is where I'm from. This is how I belong to this community. This is what I know. This is what I value. There are many kids that sort of are invisible in classrooms, and it's making sure that you don't only notice the ones that are easy to notice, but the ones that are kind of quiet and kind of need you to be there for them. Teaching for me, it's a joyful experience, and it's joyful because I've worked at it, and I'm nervous every time I go into a classroom. I acknowledge those nerves because that's what keeps me on my toes. I know that it's not easy. I know that in a heartbeat something can go wrong, but I wanted to encourage teachers to know that even though there are difficult moments and things are going to get really difficult, that the joyful moments are there too, and that I want to encourage people to stand up and teach.